Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's get going. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for taking time out of your Monday to join us today. We're very excited at the Acceleration Consortium to host our first industry panel. And today's panel is entitled Tools and Technologies for the Lab of the Future. My name is Padraic Foley, Director of Strategy and Partnerships with the Acceleration Consortium, and I'm joined today by some wonderful guests. But before we introduce our guests, here's a quick overview of the schedule. I will spend no more than 2 minutes introducing the Acceleration Consortium. We'll ask our 5 panelists to introduce their companies and their product offerings. We'll go into some panel discussion where I've set aside some questions to have a panel discussion. If anybody does have some questions, please feel free to put into the chat, and I'll take care of as we get to the closing hour. And we have set up breakout rooms, and so the rooms will be open from 11 a.m. to 12 Eastern for any conversations, if anybody would like to have one-on-one conversations with their speakers today. So who are we? So the Acceleration Consortium, we're based at the University of Toronto, and we're really looking to accelerate the discovery of materials and molecules needed for a more sustainable future. We're looking to build with our global community self-driving laboratories combining material science, AI, robotics, advanced computing to really reduce the time and the cost of bringing these new advanced materials and molecules to market. We are based at U of T, but as you'll see with our speakers, we really are a global community of academics, industry, and technology partners. We have 3 overarching goals within the Acceleration Consortium. Number 1, how do we transform scientific innovation, both within academia and within our industry partners? How do we build an innovation ecosystem, as we're seeing with our speakers today, that we can help accelerate their commercialization of their technologies with the lab of the future? And then number 3, training, is how do we create a nationwide, if not a global, training platform to provide the next generation of talent as it relates to AI, material science expertise, both within academia and then, of course, within industry partners. Our panelists, we have Marshall, product manager from Kebotix. We have Jason, CEO of Telescope Innovations and an AC faculty member. We have Andy, CEO of Gearu Labs and an AC faculty member. Khaled, the CEO of LabsCubed, and last but not least, Mathias, the CIO of Chemspeed. Here's our companies. I'll leave this up here for a second so I don't have to spend too much time, but you'll hear from these 5 individuals in about 30 seconds. And last but not least, thank you for joining us this morning, taking time out of your busy schedules. We are quite active on Twitter, so please feel free to follow us at the acceleration_C for future updates. And I will stop sharing, and Andy, hand it over to you to share your screen.
Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I will start. Good morning. We are Gearu. Thanks for the invite today. So a little bit about our company. So the paradigm really is here. The global scientific instrument market is estimated to grow to about $16 billion in the next few years, and almost all of those instruments are designed to be used by humans. So our basic idea is, rather than automating the instruments, let's automate the researcher. And that was the fundamental concept, is still the fundamental concept for our company. So here's a video showing some of the work we've done. We published this work last year in Nature. And this is the mobile robot scientist, as we called it, carrying out a materials discovery project in this case. But the technology is not limited to materials research. It's pretty broadly applicable in multiple domains. So we're working on the software and the hardware aspects. You can see there's some software development we're doing on the interface and the underpinning navigation method. You can see the laser scanning robot navigating the lab, and this was our first autonomous experiment, which ran for 8 days, 24/7. So the robot is automated, but it's also autonomous. It has an AI which drives it, and it does the experiments and then decides what to do next. So that's the technology. And we're trying to productize this now to become really push button research. So you can set a target or set of targets and press a big physical green go button, and the robot will do the rest. And this is real data coming off the platform. And the system is making decisions about what to do next. And in this case, the robot operates for 8 days and it does almost 700 experiments. And this is an example in catalysis. So the robot discovers a catalyst which is 6 times more active than the starting materials the starting catalyst by itself. And to give you some kind of scale here, 600 is probably more than a human PhD student would do in a whole PhD. So this is like a PhD in a week, if you will, at least in terms of volume. So the technology is very, very fast. And the team that we have is a very diverse team. We have chemists, we have people with expertise in AI, we have people who are hard roboticists with robotic background, some software engineers, and also recently some engineers, physical engineers. So it's a real mixture of skills that makes the company. And I guess our sort of elevator pitch is that we have 20 years experience in chemistry automation, but we're also combining that with the deep sector specific knowledge in areas of chemistry, materials chemistry, and materials characterization. So that's the offering in a nutshell. And that's Gearu. I think that's shorter than 5 minutes, but look forward to discussing.
Super. Thank you, Andy. Jason?
Thanks very much, Andy. Really happy to be here too. So by a little introduction, I'm newly CEO to Telescope Innovations. We just actually came out of stealth mode a couple of weeks ago. As a quick introduction, we actually are listed on the CSE. So just by regulation at that point, I just want to mention that, again, what we're discussing here today is not a company prospectus and not meant to imply that point. But we did just close an oversubscribed round for $4 million. And that allowed us to sort of leapfrog into the space. Really, where we position ourselves, my background is in reaction mechanism and using automation to understand what's going on inside systems. So fundamentally, we approach this part as a medicinal and process chemist. I came to automation because this was necessary in order to sort of do our work with the team size and just the expansive different problems that we had. So the name of the company really derives from one of our close sort of goals, which is to really collapse multi-step synthesis in the pharmaceutical space. Telescoping a reaction is where we take a multi-step transformation where normally you go through this iterative process of discovery, isolation, analysis, and then kind of chaining them together. If you understand deep enough about what's happening in that space, you can actually carry out multi-step transformations and basically collapse the time to sort of push this part through. So automation plays very closely in that space. What we've actually done is use our background in robotics and robotic development to really turn it towards a specific goal. So the need in this specific case was really focused on new mental health medications. So we actually have, as a what we do, a target that we're moving towards right now, where the new route that we've sort of come up, which would be normally sort of a couple of years of late stage process chemistry, we did in a series of months, and it's really by leveraging the technology we have. So focusing on this as our model, right? The problem first is really the key. From that, it's developing the technology to sort of help to accelerate that. And in my specific background, and what I focus most on is this idea of online visualization. Knowing what's happening inside a reaction is critical, but in order to get that sort of very high degree of domain knowledge, it's a relatively complicated, or at least a laborious series of experiments. So to do that, this online visualization is done by using kit that we built in-house and turning that loose where The robot itself is the one that's both executing it, but also making decisions about what's happening in the reaction, using that mechanistic knowledge to guide the transformation and optimization. So much like Andy, we've really started in this foray of autonomous experimentation. We're really the gearheads on this point. We're the ones that are building this point. The first demonstration in the space was actually done through our academic labs with our AC chair, the one who launched us all here, Alana Asper-Guzik. So it's through that project that really what took our expertise in this automation space and sort of launched it out into using this into an actual sort of tangible application. So the package that we're using right now is really focused on this hardware. Really what we're bringing together here is in many years of this applied automation, or to sort of, again, focus on late stage process development. We're now fusing together these different platform technologies where it's the hardware and the software piece as well. And really within that, we've been able to sort of create these kind of desk systems that allow us to carry through these late stage process optimization. The technology we have is really based around 6-axis systems for the Canova platform, but it's broader than that. We do a lot of sort of fit to purpose sort of building around it, where again, it's this mechanistic development is what's really driving what we're doing. So again, not to draw it out, we want to make sure we get plenty of time for everybody else and discussion. So really appreciate the opportunity for you guys to talk to you guys today.
Fantastic, thank you, Jason. Khaled, we'll hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me just bring up the presentation. Very much seems like we're all going to be saying somewhat of the same thing, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so LabsCubed, co-founder and CEO. So we started the company about 5 years ago. Same problem as everyone else, right? Making materials is difficult, time intensive, takes a lot of time, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of the same problems that we're going through. And for me, it was very much something I only started to realize when I was in the middle of a master's. So working with large corporations, and they were taking, a decade or plus to make a new adhesive. And it just amazed me that it could take so long to do that. And that's kind of what we started delving into as a company and trying to understand from a customer perspective, from a day-to-day perspective, why does it take so long? So again, same as everybody else, right? Very manual and repetitive processes today. Everything's done manually, and it still is. Large corporations to small corporations. I mean, some of the stuff that Jason and Andy showed, absolutely amazing work. But today, I mean, we all know like a normal lab sitting at any large corporation is still manual. Whether it's the mixing, et cetera, they're starting to integrate in pieces of automation, but it's still taking quite a bit of time. But yeah, it's kind of, we looked at this manual and repetitive process and started to think, how can we improve this? And automation, AI, software, bringing that all together into a big capability, big lab would be kind of the ultimate solution in the end. And that was kind of how we started the company 5 years ago. But we also started hitting a brick wall kind of with a lot of people because this was too big of a project for people to take on, I found. Large corporations kind of had some idea that this is what they wanted to do internally. Smaller, let's say medium, small corporations, this is not something kind of on the radar, whether it's a cost prohibitive thing or the complexity in terms of integration. And I think part of this conversation that we'll have coming up is talking about, how to start integrating some of this stuff today into your labs and the complexity behind that. And so we kind of got stuck at the beginning in a lot of this stuff. So what we did is we went back and took a step back and thought, could we automate specific things for the polymer industry today? And that's kind of where we started. So we just looked at the highest volume testing that they do. And we thought, we'll automate that first, and then we'll take it piece by piece. We'll start with that. Then we'll get a really clean data. Then we'll get that really clean data. We can attach that to AI systems, improve that aspect. So we're kind of taking it as a piece by piece process from our point. So what we did is we started with one piece of equipment specifically made for the rubber industry, actually. And it automates, I mean, everybody might know these here, tensile samples, these very simple dumbbells, but they're kind of at the heart of every test that gets done almost at every lab that we saw when we went into the rubber industry and every rubber lab. And so we started with this piece of equipment, and that kind of gets us a starting point with them. And that allows them to integrate something in today that's a proof point. So management can go, okay, there's a proof point that I could save time and money, and why it's so good to start bringing in automation. And then it allows them to grow bigger and bigger and do bigger and bigger projects over time. Patented, saves a tremendous amount of time, much more consistent than the way they do things before, exactly as you would expect kind of by bringing in automation. but still something that you need to prove to people in industry in the end. We have amazing customers. So Bridgestone, we have some more that have kind of jumped on. We have pilots that are on for the plastic side as we kind of start growing. But we've kind of been selling these machines, putting them into labs. And what's been amazing is it's been a good learning experience because now we talk about the next step. So how are you integrating in AI? What is your data management? What other automation do you really want to put into your labs? What's important? What's not important to you? So we've kind of been going through that path, taking it from the other direction, I guess, one piece at a time. Our ask of the group today, so as we kind of connect to a lot of great people here, and I see there's a lot of amazing people here, is connect to people working in the elastomer space. So whether it's academic or industry. We've now started, so we started with rubber as our first machine. We're now expanding out towards plastics and adhesives. We've already started automation and lab equipment for people that work in that space. So we'd like to connect and join, have more pilot partners jump on. We have some great ones so far. Just kind of the more the better. And then we're starting to kind of look at this concept of an MVP for a fully automated lab around plastic specifically. So either 3D printing or green materials. And again, this is kind of a push from industry that we're finding now, where this is becoming more and more important to start kind of integrating automation, AI, all that kind of stuff. They're starting to put more funds behind it as more proof points come up. That's it. Thank you so much, everybody. Look forward to the conversation in a bit.
Super. Thank you, Khaled. I think you got a hit in the chat from your ask. So well done to you. Mathias, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. So thanks a lot. So my name is Mathias. I'm Chief Information Officer here at Chemspeed. We are the world leader in automated workflow solutions. And I'm going to speak a bit about what we see is more important in R&D labs. So the degree of automation or digital twins. And because I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to start right into it. So we see the radical dynamic digital twin at the center for the future labs. So the last 25 years, we built what you see on the left, bottom-up digitalization. So what we call Arc Suite Flex Shuttle, where I'm going to show you in a second how we do that. And then we now take the same approach, but use it for already existing labs. And we call that top-down digitalization. At the center is our workflow management software that integrates all the different aspects. So we have, of course, our own solutions, but also third-party instruments, human beings, the already existing lab informatics systems, ERPs, also third-party AI and ML algorithms. So bottom-up digitalization is you basically approach us with a workflow. We design a whole system, and then you can execute in a fully automated lab your workflow. So this is an example where we have over 200 square meters of lab, 70 robotic modules, which can do 80,000 samples per year. But this is not where we see the future of the lab. This is just a quick example. So this is basically the labs that we already built that are already out there. And now what I wanted to show you, but it seems that the PowerPoint froze, is the manual labs. Just give me a second.
If easier, Mathias, we do have a question around what does the lab of the future look like? Would you like us to come back to show your video during that Q&A segment?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Do you want to share any more slides, Mathias, or should we hand it over to Marshall?
I would actually like to, but I need like 30 seconds to do so.
Absolutely. I would tell a joke, but I'm not very good, so I'll just stay quiet unless anybody else has a joke.
No, that's actually.
Maybe
so anyway,
so
maybe I can actually explain a bit more on now. It's actually live again. Very good. Okay, so the remaining 2 minutes I wanted to spend on top-down digitalization. So if you already have an existing laboratory in place, then we start by 3D scanning. This will give us a data cloud, and we will create a digital twin out of the already existing lab. And now this is actually the video that I want to show you. So we have a low-code platform, and you can easily just drag and dropping your workflow steps, kind of configure your experiments, and then have a lab technician or chemist in the lab wearing a HoloLens. And the HoloLens will then guide him as a robot, but it's still a human being through the whole workflow step. And during the whole steps, because we integrate all different machines, lab equipment that is out there, everything is being protocoled, and you basically have the data recorded as if it were by an automated system. So this is a very simple example that I show you here, but it's basically step by step. You're being guided what you have to do, which substance you have to pick, how much you have to dispense. We also have connected, for example, in this scenario, the balance. So the actual stable weight of the balance is being recorded. And so you don't have to note anything down anymore. And then because you're actually interacting with our digital twin of your lab, we can also show you which knobs you have to turn. We can show you some animations on how to basically use a syringe, or which port you have to inject to. We can show you which knobs to turn and to which degree. So we call this LabsCubed Sophia. And it also has a module, but is still under patenting, that allows for the whole protocoling of your experiments. And if you want to show, if you want me to show you this, then you just can contact me. Here's my email address. And this is basically my ask for this meeting. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mathias. I think you've opened up a whole new world of AR for grad students, I think, as someone put in the chat. Marshall, last but not least, over to you.
Absolutely. Good day, everyone, to wherever you are. And I believe you should be seeing my slides up now. Hopefully that's the case. So I'm Marshall Brennan. I'm a product manager for Kebotix. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. And I have the pleasure of going last, which means I don't have to explain all the background of why the laboratory research space is so expensive these days. We have a simple goal at Kebotix for our long term, which is that we want to bring the cost of developing new materials down tenfold. Right now, it costs upwards of $20 million to bring a material to market. If we get that to $2 or $1 million, I think we'd have achieved something really great. There are all sorts of ways to think about sustainability as part of this as a goal, and we're aligned with the sustainability initiatives and global warming related mitigation initiatives as part of that. But really the core question that we seek to ask when we are developing new products is how can we help researchers create chemicals and materials faster and cheaper? At a glance, Kebotix, we are fundamentally a tech company that has both a software and a lab component, not unlike some of my colleagues on this presentation panel. We've been running for about 3 years now, going on 4. We have a main office in Cambridge, Mass, and a primary lab in Woburn, Mass. But at this point, our team is increasingly interdisciplinary and increasingly distributed. And aside from the folks who are physically working on the instrumentation in the lab, we're actually remote first and distributed in actually multiple countries now. So the team is growing. We've had a huge onboarding process this year, and we are still hiring. So if there are any folks in the that are engineers, data scientists, or even in the business development space, sales, that are interested in what we're doing here, we're only getting bigger as we continue to take on bigger and bigger challenges. And to look at how we're doing to solve the problem of the expense of the research enterprise at a glance, this cartoon shows our core thesis, which said this closed loop process that connects software to hardware is really what's going to drive us forward. And so in this case, we have our ability to predict using machine learning and physical models, the molecules of interest, move those onto our lab. Now in this, we have an actual lab, like I said, in Woburn, Mass, but this can also be deployed on essentially any lab system that we have an integration for, and go through the automated testing process and prototyping platform. And this all feeds back on itself. So the more times you use our system, the better it gets. And so if we break this down into actual tools, what we're talking about is today is primarily in the software space around our AI and simulation. The other folks on the panel will be talking a lot about the hardware of the lab of the future, but we have a lot going on in this space around how we can optimize, predict, and synthesize in silico different molecules. But again, importantly, is that all of this is interconnected, and it's this a self-driving lab platform that goes from that de novo simulation all the way through synthesis, with tools all along the way for every member of the research organization that wants to get involved. And this really is meant to drive toward the idea that we are meeting our customers where they are. And we know that the transformation toward the lab of the future and the fully automated self-driving lab is going to involve a lot of people at different stages of their journey of getting acquainted with automated software. So for the folks that have very little exposure to AI and machine learning, we're building interfaces that make it very easy for them to get involved and work with these softwares, all the way up to the command line interfaces and GUIs and external integrations that allow power users to get involved. And our hope is that people who enter at one end of that life cycle will grow with us and become those power users of the future. And so we've had this opportunity as we start thinking about that idea of meeting our customers where they are, about looking at software as a service products, so SaaS products as it were. And so if we break down that first software component of the cycle, we can take out our 3 core offerings. And these obviously have different components underneath them, but broadly speaking, we go from virtual discovery, where we can help you find what molecules to make based on certain criteria. This comes from library generation up through property prediction, and anything that comes down to connecting properties to chemical structures. We have Reaction Sage, which is our forward and retro synthesis prediction software suite that takes those molecules outputted by virtual discovery and helps you figure out how to make them. So now you know what to make, how to make it. And then when it's time to actually put the pedal to the metal and actually make these things, ChemOS is our platform for actually optimizing the synthesis or formulation of these different materials. And this works both completely in silico or in conjunction with lab automation in the physical laboratory. So again, we can connect back and iterate upon this process and optimize both the synthesis itself and the actual properties of the materials that we're looking to develop by feeding back into the beginning of this cycle. And so our goal as part of this whole suite is to transition researchers from thinking about target-oriented discovery, where they're focused on the chemotype that they're looking for, to function-oriented discovery, where they go in with a hypothesis about what properties they want in absence of a chemotype. we're not quite there yet in terms of a fully deployed software solution, but we are closer than I probably would have expected at the beginning of the summer. And so for today, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on Reaction Sage, which is the software that we are ready to launch later this year. And we actually have partners actively using right now. Retrosynthesis is a problem that's been around for ages. I won't belabor it, but historically it's been really easy for folks like EJ over here to do, but really difficult for computers to do. And in 2017, AI had emerged that really made this seem a lot more feasible, but it really wasn't necessarily the solution that the field needs. And the reason that is because a lot of the early systems and a lot of the systems that are currently still being used are really hung up on these templates and rule-based systems where there's pattern matching for the molecules that are being made to be able to determine how to drive back from a target molecule to a starting material. And the problem is that because it's so stuck on those templates and the rules that chemists have developed, it really only extracts what we already know. It's really difficult to write new rules. So as we develop new chemistry, this doesn't really scale very well. And importantly is that if it's already telling us what we already know, then that is an inherent limitation, and it's not really augmenting what we're able to do, but more just replacing some rote work. And in general, when we talk to folks who have tried implementing these systems in their labs, the response has been kind of meh. On the other hand, AI-based systems that like what we're working with actually learn the rules of chemistry and can interpolate new reactions that we haven't seen before. And importantly, that they get better the more we use them, and we can train them on specific reaction data for partner interest. And we're actually going to be developing an interface very soon to allow you to do this ad hoc when you're using our software subscription service. And so from that perspective, we can both provide novel observations from the reaction prediction software and also focus in on very targeted problems that it needs solving.
Marshall, can I give you one more minute just so we can get into the Q&A, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for cutting me off there. I won't go into the flavor of this, but at the end of the day, we have a lot of advantages that go from you being able to do both forward and backward synthesis. We can do reagent procedure generation for being able to interface with the actual people in the lab. We focus on route diversity, so you're unlikely to get 10 variations of the same route, but you'll actually get 10 unique routes. We're designing this for autonomous usage and API connections. And importantly, if you're in this space, you'll know that a sticking point in this field is chiral molecules, and we can handle these considerably better than the competition. There's more to talk about how we go about the actual tree search, but I won't worry about that here. And instead, I will make my ask, which is that you allow us to do what our current users have been doing, which is freeing themselves up to focus on the most challenging questions rather than routine synthesis planning. And the way that you can do that now is get involved with our beta test. So I'll be in a beta breakout after the webinar if you want to talk more. But if what you've heard so far sounds interesting, we are doing free complimentary tests of Reaction Sage platform through the end of the year. All you have to do is give us 2 meetings to give feedback. This hot link will actually give you to a form where you can just fill out your information and we'll get back in touch with you. Or if there's something else I've talked about today that you're more interested in, or you really have a dream that you want answered, you can send an email to demo@kebotix.ai. This is my contact information, but I'll be around if you want to ask more questions. And without further ado, I will pass it back to our host.
Super. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, everybody, for your introductions. We're going to take a little bit of a detour here for a second, because I think Willie in the chat has asked a very interesting question before we jump into our scheduled questions. And so for all the ML AI folks here, when you execute the iterative process to optimize certain system properties, how do you, 1, deal with experiment to experiment variation, or also batch to batch, where the same design might lead to different outcomes? And number 2, how do you sample several design points per round, as VO usually provides only 1 point? Would anybody like to jump in to address Willie's question? Thank you, Willie, for your question.
So I can kick it off. I think we all have some variation, or at least approach to it. And like from experience, the at least with like in our point when we were applying the ChemOS package, this is specifically through our academic arm. The thing we found and what was so valuable to this point is basically bringing in control type experiments as a sort of an on train or sort of a scaling kind of factor. There's also another element that's necessary to sort of build in pieces around the metadata. So basically this data provenance to figure out what's happening, like what batch maybe some pieces gets attached into what your database is basically seeing. So there is a bit of a sort of a post hoc kind of a part of it. But yeah, noise is kind of the killer for a lot of the BO type methods. And at least when working with Alon's group, the thing we really found was there was ways of building in kind of these recenter and recontrol. And it's very similar to what I saw Andy's route, right? That basically as the platform is running, there's the ability for it to recalibrate for what's happening in the actual system. But it's about using the noise to your advantage, the same way you would apply.
Thank you, Jason. Andy?
Yeah, similar points to Jason, really, but actually the first examples we ever tackled were batch-wise optimization, because it just gets really slow to loop around one sample at a time. On the other hand, if you do 500 samples at a time, then the optimization gets inefficient. So we did 16 per batch, which is kind of a good compromise. But we also did a more linear sort of thing of running one control experiment throughout the search, and we've to essentially to look for platform drift, which I think is something that all of these autonomous technologies could do.
Thank you, Andy. Willie, I hope that that answers your question. What we will do now, folks, is we do have some kind of pre-scheduled questions. I'll go through those, but for anybody else, please follow Willie and Kedar's lead. Kedar, I'm going to touch on your question in a different way, and so we'll discuss on that, and then maybe perhaps in your breakout room with Kebotix. For the panelists, and maybe we'll start off with Khaled, because you kind of touched upon this in your introduction. What barriers do companies in this space need to overcome, both from the disruptor side, which of course is everybody on the call, but also on the receptor side, right? So it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg type scenario here. From your number one development work, and then number two, your conversations with some large and medium enterprises. What barriers do we collectively need to work together to overcome?
Yeah, I think the main barrier that we found, at least when we kind of started 5 years ago kind of thing, was when it comes to a company, I mean, for them, it's all about ROI, return on investment. You're selling something to management. There has to be proof points there. And so you kind of, the bigger the idea, the more proof points they're kind of expecting. And I think from an AI perspective and machine learning perspective, they've been burnt multiple times in the past, trying to implement it too early with bad data sets, right? And so they got bad results. And so from the beginning, it's kind of the excitement has dissipated a little bit and the expectations have fallen off. And now people don't trust systems as much as they did before, at least from a management perspective. So I think from our perspective, we have to come back and say, okay, how do we kind of gain that trust back? How do we prove these things? And how do we prove them to industry? Academia, it's very nice. We can do a lot of things in academia. There's things we can do in our labs. They look great. But when it comes to how do I implement it in industry today, I think that's the number one problem that we kind of kept hitting on over and over, which is kind of why we took a step back and said, okay, let's start collecting really clean, good data out of one simplified system, one piece of automation. And that can be a control system, right? So that's where you start having some control over batch to batch variation or whatever other issues start to come up in their testing process. So that's kind of how we saw maybe as a way to kind of get back in their good graces to a certain extent and prove the concepts out one step at a time. So I think that's kind of one of the main things that we saw is we have to regain the trust of industry when it comes to AI and machine learning. And then we're asking them now to take a step further and say, also automate your whole lab because we need that to make our stuff work, which is a huge leap for them to make, right? So we're asking them to make this leap. So how do we regain that trust with them?
Absolutely. Thank you. Andy, how about you from a Gearu perspective? You guys have been doing some work for a little bit with companies. What do you see those barriers? What do you see those barriers be?
Yeah, well, I'd agree with Khaled and what he said. I mean, one strategy we're taking is to try to exploit existing robust hardware. So this idea of modular automation, so tying together instruments with mobile robots where the instruments are already robust. To give just one example, we're using HPLC analysis, and really, you know, there it's a question of choosing the right HPLC, but we're not modifying the instrument in any way. So it's a productized technology, and actually the robots we're using are also commoditized technologies, you know, fairly large scale. So that doesn't mean it's easy, of course, because you still need stable software and you need stable instruments. But our approach, at least, is to try not to change too many things physically. At least, basically, not to change things when you don't need to change them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you, Jason. From a telescope innovations point of view, kind of coming out of stealth in the past couple of weeks, what are those barriers that you guys need to overcome? Yeah,
so like, and sort of to touch point on something that I needfully forgot was there's like an ask, which is, you know, what we've gotten here is we had a very laser focus on an application that we had to deliver in a very short timeline. Right? We had to scale up a molecule with a very, very light team. So what that meant for us is, much like Andy, we had to find scalable, believable technology that we could go forward with. This can't be building right from scratch at that point. But at the same time, the tools to do what we wanted to do were insufficient. So there is a bit of tool building. It's conversion from propeller to jet flight while in flight, right? So there's some difficulties there. Really, the challenge we have next is kind of where do we land, right? So there's a number of problems that we can sort of take this point to, and that's what's driving sort of our point forward. Is we focused on this sort of pharmaceutical development piece, but having an ability to sort of to help guide us as far as where the really, really clear pain points are that we can sort of turn into is the biggest conversation we're looking for right now. Much like Andy mentioned as well, and actually, Khaled, you nailed it. Like, people have been burned so many times around hearing automation AI is going to fix the world, right? And that's absolutely by design not what we are after, because there's been so much failed realization based on CombiChem and the original sort of parallelization sort of technology. What we really trying to do differently now is to say that, look, I did not get a PhD to be able to learn how to separate two dots on HPLC or on a plate, right? I'm here to do creative analysis, and this toolkit that we have is really that hardware that has to go on top of us to be real discovery engines, right? So it's guiding the focus of what the real problem is, what are the kit that's available now, and where do we really have to go and build, right? Like, what is the actual thing that we have to sort of design that needs to be new? And doing that in a modular way is the only way to do it.
No, thank you, Jason. I'm going to come to Mathias. Mathias, Chemspeed are somewhat the elder statesperson of the group here today. What are your thoughts on those barriers now and in the future potentially?
Yeah, so basically we spent 25 years, you know, trying to bring as much automation to our customers as possible. But what we learned is basically we cannot care too much about how much the people want to automate, but we will try to just, you know, take the same approach from the automation and build it into our software so that they can choose themselves. I want to only automate one module, or I want to just stay with my already existing lab and then maybe add some modules. But as Andy already said, we are also trying to integrate all the different already existing technologies, the existing analytical equipments that are out there, so that we don't have to go to the customer and explain them why they need new things. And that's a bit our approach.
Thank you, Mathias. And Marshall, last but not least, I'll let you go first next time, I promise.
It's okay. These folks have considerably more to say than I do anyway. No, so one of a lot of the feedback that the rest of the panel has said rings true for us too. But one of the other aspects that I'll say when we're trying to break out to the field at large, especially individual researchers, this comes both from my experience with Kebotix and also my time working with SLAS, where when we talk to researchers who aren't familiar with the innovations in the automation space, what I've realized is that you're not usually competing with, amongst the various folks in the automation space. The real barrier usually is to compete against the multi-channel pipette. Because at the end of the day, that's really the industry that you're trying to uproot here. So you're trying to convince someone to say, hey, look, instead of going to the bench and doing this the way you've been doing it your entire career, however long it's been, here's this thing. You're going to invest this time and energy in learning right now, and it's going to pay off when you don't have to turn this crank anymore. And that's a hard habit to get people out of. And I think that it's a bit of a non-trivial, but certainly surpassable barrier as we sort of bring these tools to people in ways that relate to their day-to-day workflow. And so that's really the barrier to implementation, is making sure that people see the value from the perspective of how does this fit into their day-to-day workflow, and creating that sort of wedge.
No, thank you, Marshall. And that kind of leads into the next question. And Alan touched upon this in the chat. So as we're building out the Acceleration Consortium, right? So this global consortium of academia, large multinationals, startup, tech entrepreneurs, investors. What can we do to support you and others in this space as we help drive this paradigm shift? In quoting Alan in the chat, as the AC gets started, what would be our best way to help SMEs and established such as Chemspeed solution providers in the space? And what would you like to see from us to help with our 3 missions of research, community building, and training? So Marshall, maybe we'll start off you first. What can the AC do to help?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 aspects that I think are really important for an organization like the Acceleration Consortium. The first one is just that bare minimum training, getting these sort of tools out in a digestible fashion. It's going to what I was just saying about, getting researchers acquainted with the idea that the automation isn't scary. You can use it, and it's not going to be something that's going to, take away your job. For certainly, it's going to just change how it works. That sort of communication and doing those sorts of things where there's not always an inherent trust of a for-profit organization in that regard is really useful. The other thing that really is powerful for a company, certainly at our stage, is as we encounter these use cases that we're not going to see every single day, a lot of the time is that there's a very easy way to apply the tools that we're working with that we just haven't seen. And so being able to surface those things, for instance, one of our partners at Scripps, who's in our current beta test, had been using our forward reaction prediction software to tease out potential side products in a reaction. And that was something that hadn't crossed our mind as a potential use of this particular piece of software, but is requiring maybe 2 weeks of work to build that out into like a dedicated feature. And that's the sort of thing that, like, surfacing that to us from the conversations you're having, it may be a very low barrier for us to be able to solve these problems that we just don't see because we're not in these organizations all the time.
Absolutely. No, good point. Mathias?
Yeah, I mean, I see one of the best things you can do is, of course, foster this dialogue that we're currently into, like roundtables, and then also, trying to convince everybody to go with the cutting edge technologies that you've seen during these talks.
No, thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I don't have much to add over what Marshall said, and Mathias.
Thank you. Jason or Khaled?
The only thing I'll add is one of the things that we found from an industry perspective is when it comes to a large project like this, if you're trying to solve material science issues and automation and AI, and you're trying to integrate these systems in, you have to find there's a lot of different stakeholders in a corporation that are involved, and it becomes really complex to kind of go through that process. You're talking to the chemical team or the engineering team, and the management team gets involved. So I think one of the things is, if you're starting to speak to multinationals and these large organizations, is trying to perhaps be more or less, the AC can be kind of an integrator. You're looking at all these solutions that might exist from the end of, what academia is pushing out or what startups might have. And it's something where you can kind of bring these pieces together, because from a startup perspective, it's very time consuming to go through a large multinational and have to find all your stakeholders and go through the process and figure out the problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jason?
No, I think that captures it really well. The challenge right now is finding our tribe, right? And I think that one of the things is sort of building this part out, and honestly, why I got involved at the AC is because there's so many different languages that are necessary in order to be successful here, right? In terms of the hardware development, the integration, how to use it properly, how to use the data properly, and then the actual sort of chemical challenge you're putting into. That is a fully new ecosystem, interdisciplinary that's necessary, and that takes a very almost new language in order to make sure that those different disciplines are talking well to each other and asking the right problems. The biggest thing I think we've seen these last couple of years is barriers that we thought were insurmountable have been solved in comp sci long ago, and we just didn't know, right? And that's the biggest thing, that is to have the communication to make sure that we're properly growing.
No, thank you. No, that's excellent, and that's a major goal of the AC, is how do we bring this community together and really look to provide value. And so how do we bring our academics, our startups, our SMEs, our large customers with multinationals, and really understand what's the best solution for the problem. And you're right, Khaled, maybe we will have to integrate startups with the academics to complement each other, which in my mind isn't a bad thing. And so I very much view the AC becoming somewhat of a sandbox in a way, to not just develop technologies, but also de-risk deployments in a very structured manner. There's a question in the chat that I'm going to answer, or I'm going to ask in another way. And so many believe that we're kind of at this inflection point of a hockey stick for growth in terms of market and opportunities. We have a lot of attendees on the call from oil and gas, polymers, traditional materials, pharma, ceramics, glass, catalyst development, and then of course your fine chemicals. The question in the chat is somewhat related, saying it seems that this is very pharmaceutical or life science oriented. I'm going to come to all of you because I don't think it is. And so maybe Khaled, we'll start with you in terms of what makes a good first target, and how do other industries reorient? So you were looking at very much at rubber. Now we get into elastomers and polymers. How did you target those customers? What was the aha moment in a way to go after those industries?
So we entered into the polymer space. So what we did is we're I don't know if any of you guys know, but there's a velocity accelerator or incubator here in Kitchener-Waterloo. So we're looking up here in Canada, and it's a great incubator. And engineers and scientists work great at making up our own problems and then going to solve them. So we're really good at that. Engineers love to kind of create amazing solutions, but they forced us to kind of go out and talk to customers, and that's where the whole process started. So we went and talked to large OEMs, so people who are automotive, aerospace, et cetera, all the way down to their suppliers. And we looked at the different material verticals, and we found, from a polymer perspective at least, it was one of those industries or that material vertical that was changing very quickly. So today you're seeing it, whether it's advanced manufacturing in terms of 3D printing, they're having to make greener plastics. Plastics are now kind of the biggest villain, I think, even more than coal and everything else out there. So they're trying to have, greener materials, that kind of thing. So we saw that part of it, but we also saw they develop really quickly. They're doing a lot of testing. They're doing a lot of work. Every lab we went into is much busier. When you look at metals, they take a long time, and they're a very different length of use for those. So that's kind of how we've decided on plastics and polymers, generally speaking. Then elastomers was more or less just to do with the fact that, as a small business, we needed something very niche and targeted, so we don't have to deal with a huge vertical, and just kind of target that first. And it was also just untouched. There was literally no innovation happening in it. The average age in rubber is like 60 or something like that of people that work in it. So it's very old school industry, kind of ready for that disruption. So that's how we went through that thought process.
No, useful. Thank you. Rather than picking anybody, I'll open it up for anybody else in terms of let's talk about applications that are non-life sciences, because I think that's also somewhat of the holy grail is looking beyond your traditional pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, sort of speaking to what Khaled was saying, the Kebotix, a big driver of what we're working on is in the material space, OLEDs, pigments, et cetera. And the biggest thing about it is just that those areas are just ravenous for technology. Thinking about some of the conversations I had at my previous positions, the disparity between the tools available to certain circles is pretty dramatic. So for instance, I was talking with someone who was working with certain polymers, and just the sort of workarounds we had to do in order to be able to automate the work he was doing relative to like what we were seeing in the life sciences, where that material was a lot more, or those tools were much more sophisticated. It makes it very clear that the potential delta is pretty high in some of these, material space, especially with advanced materials, both from the potential output and the opportunity, and all of those learnings translate back to these other areas that can also benefit from it. So that's kind of my perspective on this problem area selection.
Oh, thank you, Marshall. Andy, you've your hand raised.
Yeah, so clearly pharma was an early adopter in automation, but mainly I would say in lead entity discovery. Then there's process chemistry and there's drug formulation. They're different challenges, even within pharma, actually. But as Marshall said, there's a whole wealth of opportunity. From Gearu side, we have projects with pharma now, but the first projects we had were with materials company, actually. So and there's a huge opportunity there. But I would just make the point that not all of pharmaceuticals is automated either, so there's still a large opportunity there too.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Andy. Jason or Mathias, any kind of thoughts on that?
So just quickly, the analogy I usually use is around that. You know, I entered PhD studies to cure cancer, and I left, you know, being able to separate things on a column, right? There's always, every level of research and development has that kind of story where you are this massively trained creative engine that there's some task that's not what you signed up for, right? That's not the piece of it that's necessary. So there is a massive piece of it in the automation AI piece to really help with that part of it. So that's always going to be a piece of it. And just, you know, again, unlocking that potential just means that it's through these kind of conversations that we'll be able to really identify what comes next. I think Marty Burke, amazing colleague, physically said, you know, chemistry, yes, it's the central science, but there's almost no major challenge we are facing that doesn't have a molecular solution. And that synthesis, that just means if you can make it, there's going to be something we have to do here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. Mathias, final word to you.
Yeah, so I mean, I see that all these different industries are somewhat linked together. If you go really down to the individual steps in the research cycles. And so that's what we try to do, you know, like incrementalize really to the individual steps, and then you can reshuffle them for the different industries.
Absolutely, and I think from an AC perspective, I think that's exactly what we're looking to do. We're looking to solve those fundamental challenges that, regardless of the sector you're in, we're looking to kind of overcome those barriers. Looking at the clock, we're a minute over, so my apologies, everybody. First of all, thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your day for what seemed like an excellent discussion. That hour flew by, if I'm perfectly honest. So thank you, panelists. For attendees, thank you for taking time out of your day to join, actively participating in the conversation through the chat. The chat looks quite busy, and the breakout rooms are open. So for anybody who would like to have a conversation, a one-on-one conversation with Andy from Gearu, Jason from Telescope, Mathias from Chemspeed, Marshall from Kebotix, and Khaled from LabsCubed, they're open. So feel free to go and meet with the tech companies. And we look forward to keeping everybody updated on our activities as we all look to build this community to drive this paradigm shift and provide value across the full spectrum of materials and molecular discovery.